the technological community, Mr. Ray Zinn. One of his many accomplishments is being the longest-serving CEO of a publicly traded company in Silicon Valley. There's one more important item as well. Ray Zinn is the author of Tough Things First, an autobiographical discussion of the interaction of people, management, and mechanics of enterprises. Based on the magnitude of his experience, who better would there be to predict the future of silicon, China, and the IoT? Please give a very warm and loud welcome for Mr. Ray Zinn.
What a great crowd. I really appreciate the attendance. You know, it's really an interesting experience to be a keynote speaker. I get to do that quite a bit, not just because I'm the author of this book, but because of my experience in semiconductors and primarily Silicon Valley. Very proud of what we've accomplished, and I feel blessed that I am part of Silicon Valley, and I am the ex-CEO of Micrel Semiconductor. We started in 1978 right here in the Bay Area. We started with the concept of having a semiconductor company that was not venture funded. And the reason I chose to be not venture funded was because I wanted to, number one, own most of the company. And secondly, I wanted to be able to dictate the future of the company. I wanted to have it go a certain way. My concept was to build a company first and then add products later. When I went to the bank and to try to raise money to start Micrel, they said, well, we don't fund startups. And I said, well, but tell me what, if you were to start fund a startup, what would you do? How would you go about doing that? And they said, well, we can't tell you because we've never done it before. And I said, well, let's think outside the box. What would it take? And they said, well, you'd have to be profitable from day one. And so that changed my business plan. So in other words, I had to move from a plan where I could lose money for a period of time, like most startups do. I had to make money from day one. So they listed a whole bunch of covenants that I have to agree to, and I then proceeded to try to understand what it would take then to run this company with the concept of not losing money. And so that was that's not how I started. I mean, I was thinking about a conventional company, you know, where you had products and then you hired people and so forth. But that wasn't the way the bank would fund me. And so we had to change the concept to more of a service company that would be profitable from day one and then add products once we could afford to do so. And that's what happened. So in 1978, in November, I opened the doors. We started adding people and developing a company doing services for semiconductor companies. And that allowed us to be profitable from the outset. So, and then in 1985, we had enough resources that we could add products. And that's kind of how we started. But from day one, the company was profitable, and we have never lost money for the 37 years, except for 1 year in 2002, when I had to consolidate 2 wafer fabrication facilities down to one. And in that year, we lost $50,000. And that, I think, is a hallmark or an example of what can be done if you can think and be creative, thinking outside the box. So the other thing we did is we focused on employees. Micrel was an employee-driven company. We went through a number of business cycles, and as a consequence, because we had to adapt. So what is so unique about Silicon Valley is that we adapt to change. We solicit change. That's why you're here today. You know, the concept of innovation and developing new technology is really what makes Silicon Valley so unique and what makes semiconductor companies so important. If the problem doesn't have adversity associated with it, it's really, there's no challenge involved in in that development of that creation of that product. So if you look at this slide here, which I talk about the adversity of inventiveness, you'll see that it takes a while for people to adapt and to want to accept your idea. It's 80% of the people that you're dealing with don't want to change. It's our nature. We don't want to change. We want everything to remain the same because we're comfortable. So there are a few, of course, there are early adapters, and they jump on the curve. But it takes about 5 years, or 3 to 5 years, for change to be adapted. So 80% of the people you're going to talk to are going to tell you that's a dumb idea. So when I started my Krell in '78, and I asked a close friend of mine, what do you think about the way I'm going to do it, the kind of business I want to run? And he says, you're crazy. You're not going to succeed. Well, that individual ended up working for me about 10 years later. So, they don't, early adapters, there's a few, but the majority of the people are not going to accept your ideas. When I created the wafer stepper back in 1974, IBM said that was the most stupid idea ever foisted on mankind. And yet, today the wafer stepper is one of the most important pieces of equipment in our industry. When we got the first stepper out in 1976, it took about another 8 years for the industry to adapt to the stepper. So it does take time. So you have to remember that your great idea is not going to get accepted instantaneously. That there are going to be naysayers out there that say, no, that's not going to work, that's not a good idea. So you have to be willing to stay the course. And that's the adversity of inventiveness. We talk about Moore's Law. Moore's Law is that technology will double every couple of years. Well, I call Moore's Law different. Moore's Law, to me, is you get more for less. Because, you can see that we've taken this little transistor that used to sell for thousands of dollars, and you can get millions of transistors on a chip for a few $100s, and thinking of like an i7 or something like that. There are cycles associated with innovation, and we have to live with that, because there's a cycle associated with the innovation itself. Then there's the semiconductor cycle, or the consumption cycle, and then our business cycle. So they all kind of work together. Now a cycle, if you look at an innovation cycle, it lasts about 4 or 5 years, and then we have to create a new product. So every company will end up having to go through a kind of a rebirth, as you would every few years. Back in the early days of semiconductors, the percent of R&D expense was quite low, because you're just creating a single chip. But then as they got more complex, then the percentage of R&D has increased. Now we're getting to an interesting inflection point, because if you look at the gross margins of our chips, in the 50% range, and then you subtract from that SG&A, then the rest you can use as research and development. So at some point, we're going to hit the plateau where we really can't add much more in research and development, because we've hit that limit now. Unless gross margins can increase, we don't have much more we can spend on our chips. And then, since we're now a worldwide industry, that we're now competing with countries that have lower cost basis, and we have to figure out some way to be able to still be innovative, be creative with less. And another challenge that we had, of course, is believing in people and being able to manage our cash. And that's one of the things that I think we did well, is in managing cash. A friend of mine who I knew quite well was having lunch with me one day, and he says, "You're really stingy, aren't you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I heard that you have a cigar box in your desk, and you hand the dollars out one at a time." And I said, "Well, you have to manage cash, because if you run out of money, you're going to run out of business." Now to the issue about where is the industry headed? What's the challenge that we face? As you know, those of you who are from Silicon Valley know that virtually all the manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing, is now being offshored, is not, at least in Silicon Valley. That's going to be a challenge. That's going to be something that we have to decide. What are we going to be as an industry? I know for a fact that Korea and China have said that they want to source all of their semiconductors within their own country. So that's going to be a challenge for us that we're going to have to deal with. Because if we continue to offshore and we have no manufacturing here, that's going to relegate us to being primarily innovators and developers, but not manufacturers. So if we don't do something, if something doesn't change in this way, then we're going to relegate ourselves to being more of a software type semiconductor company as opposed to being a manufacturer. Your customers are not going to tell you what you need. They're not going to say, here's an idea. The ideas have to come from you. So forget about your customers helping you in that respect. In fact, your customers are going to be just like that bathtub curve I showed a minute ago. They're going to be resistant to change. They don't want to change. So you have to convince them, and it's going to take some time, that this idea, this product idea you have is going to solve their problem. If you recall back in, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, if somebody said that you're going to use your cell phone as a camera, you'd laugh. But look today. Today, you know, everybody uses their cell phone. Now, how many would have thought that would replace now that point and shoot? I must have 5 point and shoot cameras in my closet I don't even use anymore because I have my camera, my cell phone. Now we're talking about driverless automobiles. Now, you know, if you'd have asked me, you know, 20 years ago, because I'm legally blind and don't even have a driver's license, would I be able to drive a car? I would have said, no, there's no way. Get out of my way. You know, I mean, it is not possible. Well, here we are. You know, we're on the verge of now having driverless cars. If you think out, get outside the box. By the way, going outside the box is going from the known, which is what we know, to the unknown, which is outside the box, to going even further. So what you're here today is to think about going beyond the box, not just a little bit, way beyond. And sensors are going to be everywhere. You know, in order for us to have these driverless cars, we're going to have sensors. And in IoT, and Internet of Things, that's all about sensors. And but with that, with the advancement in this technology, we also lose privacy. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. So if you want more flexibility and be able to have a driverless car or to have somebody be able to monitor your home, you are going to lose some privacy. As we go forward, we have to think, and if some of you who have small companies, you got to think big. And those of you who have big companies, you got to think small, because the bigger you are, the less customer-centric you're going to be. And if as a small company, you have to be customer-centric because that's how you grow your business. But when you get big, you got to also remember that you also have to support your customers and be customer-centric. Now, big companies like large companies because of scale and support. But by the same token, large companies aren't as adaptable. They're not as mobile as a small company. And Micrel was known as the biggest small company in our industry because we thought about the customer. Now we are on the verge of having to decide what we're going to do with this industry. Whether we're going to proliferate it around the world. I heard just the other day that more companies are moving into Vietnam, and we're just proliferating this technology everywhere. And so the more proliferation we do of the technology, the more exposure we have of our business being taken away, as you would. So it's up to you. You have to decide whether or not you want this to be ubiquitous in the sense of the word of everybody being able to make them, or whether or not you want to have that centricity here in the U.S. I was talking with a politician. They don't look at our industry as important. They told me that our industry in the U.S. is smaller than the California wine industry, and that if you look at our companies that we have here, you know, most of them are not U.S. based. They're foreign based for tax reasons. Well, you know, how do you get the Congress or get the politicians to want to support you when you don't pay taxes? And that's the challenge we have, is that we want to save money, so we don't want to pay taxes, but we want the government to help us. So with that, I'm going to take some questions.
I do have a question.
Okay, sure.
So if you have a board of, I assume you had a board of directors in your company, how do you communicate and explain to them the bathtub that we have to make investment up front? It could take 3 to 5 years for market adoption. Was that an issue, and how with your board of directors, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, that's a challenge. My board was quite open. Most of the members of my board were semiconductor guys, and they understood the concept of research and development. And they don't run the company. The board of directors don't run the company. They're my boss, but they don't actually dictate how we run the company. So they leave that up to us and look at the kind of the direction of the revenues, and then that determines how much money that they think we should spend in doing research and development. So again, if you have a good board that's supportive, then you'll have that flexibility and the kind of design and technology you want to have. Now, some of these companies are venture funded, and as a consequence, that they have a time frame. In other words, they got a 5 to 7 year window in order for you to turn this thing over. In other words, either sell the company, merge it, or whatever. Oftentimes, venture funded companies have to grow faster than they really can. In other words, they want you to spend that money. They want you to grow. So they don't care about losses. They just want revenue. So if they get a big enough revenue, then the multiple of that determines what the value of the company is when they try to sell it. And that's all they want. They don't care about your company being around very long. They just want you to get to the point where they can either take you public or you can be acquired.
Recently, the current administration has reinvigorated or jump-started manufacturing in certain hubs around the country. And my question is really, is that a role the government should play? Is it too little, too late? And how do we really move forward? And I love the fact that your idea of cash is king. We probably wouldn't have the economic collapse that we're going through if everybody thought that way, I guess, a little bit.
Well, again, thanks. The government really can't do a lot in the sense of the word of really. We're not like a communist country where the government can dictate, or even in Japan, where they can more dictate how companies grow and how many companies they're going to allow to be in a particular business. So that's a challenge for a free capitalist society like we have. And so the challenge really becomes one of our industry drawing together and deciding how they want to protect their future. And it's really no different than you with your children. How much do you want to control them and get them to a certain point in their career path versus letting them decide for themselves. And so our government's more of a hands-off type government. I think the sad thing is they're letting us sell, as you would, our technology. They could control that, but they're allowing us to sell our technology around the world, and that's the real shame I see, is we're giving it away. It happened with the tape recording industry. We lost that because we just gave the technology away to Japan. And we're doing that now in other areas, and it won't be long until everybody will have the technology and will be able to compete with us, and it'll be a stranglehold, as you would on our industry. So I don't think the government can do a lot except maybe protect the technology that we have a little better and not let us proliferate it so much.
You stay in the CEO position. How do you deal with the company grow up, expansion, technology advancement, and also adoption of all the new ideas, and besides your strengths in employees' benefits or their well-being? So how do you handle that as a long-serving CEO?
Okay, so if I understand your question, you know, one of the reasons I stayed for so long is, number one, I loved my company, or I should say I loved my people, and so I stayed as long as I could. You know, I just retired last year in August, so it's not like I gave up. I mean, I pushed as hard as I could, and I stayed as long as I could. I wanted to be able to maintain the culture that we had and a foothold in semiconductors in Silicon Valley. I was hoping to be able to let the company continue on, but that wasn't the decision of our board. So that kind of stopped me from doing what my goal was to let the company continue on into infinity. So, you know, I only had one vote out of 6, and so that's the challenge that a CEO has, is that if you have a board, you're still only one person, and you know, the company, we did stay. I mean, 37 years is, I thought, a pretty good tenure for us. If I could have just retired and passed the baton on to someone else, I would have preferred that, but that wasn't the way it happened. So, you know, that's up to each company and each board to decide, you know, how they want the end to come, as you would for their company. You know, most of the startups here, and anybody that is having a startup company, you know, you're looking at getting out when you get in. In other words, you're already telling your investors, here's how I get out. If you remember Shark Tank, you know, that's what the sharks ask, well, how do I get my money back? And that's where they're, you know, that's before they even start. They want to know, well, how do I get out? And I think that's the challenge that most CEOs face is, you know, what are they going to do with the company going forward? Okay.
I appreciate your comments about the customers aren't always going to tell you that they need a product, and there's long technology market adoption cycles. But how do you know at some point this product isn't going to make it and it's time to pull the plug? If you ever had any of those.
Oh, no, I've had plenty of those. Just one of my employees is here, who's my vice president of marketing. Yes, we've had a lot of them that didn't go. I mean, you know, when you pull the point you decide to pull the plug is when you see there's a fatal flaw with the product. And, you know, there's pros and cons to everything, and there's an equal number. So for every pro, you have an equal number of cons. And if you need to go through those pros and cons, because as an entrepreneur or as a business person, all you really think about are all the pros. You don't want to think about the cons. You don't want to think about the things that are going to go wrong. And that's the challenge that you face, is being honest with yourself and thinking about the fatal flaws or the cons associated with the product. And the more objective you are with regard to understanding the fatal flaws of your product, the better you're going to be in selecting the right kind of product for your company. So I would invite you all to really think in terms of looking at the downside, look at the negatives of that product.
First of all, it was really inspiring. Thank you. And I honestly believe in bootstrapping as much as you did, not just raising venture capital and just hiring employees and going bust. You built a very stable company over time. So my question to you is, if you were to join the advisory board of a startup, of a millennial like me, what would it take? What do you look for in a team and in a person?
What would make me want to be an advisor?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I just did one a few weeks ago, or actually maybe a month ago. I did make a major investment in a software startup company, and I'm asked, by the way, a lot to join companies as an advisor or a member of the board. And so what I have to see is, do they have the culture of doing the tough things first? And that's the whole concept of the book. So if they've read the book and they're willing to follow the precepts that I've outlined here, because I think I've demonstrated my ability to run a company successfully, and so if they're willing to follow those concepts, then I'll take a look at maybe helping them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So you had not only a very successful company, but clearly a very successful marriage.
Yes.
You didn't lose your company and you didn't lose your wife. Sometimes that doesn't happen. How did
Yes.
you manage to balance the work and the life?
Okay, balancing work and my family by not working 60 hours a week. I realized in the beginning that if I have a supportive spouse and a supportive family, that I will be successful. That's what the first concept of success is. Because if you're not successful at home, you're not going to be successful at work. Look at the divorce rate we have in this country and in Silicon Valley. So I do focus. My family's number one, and really I look at my company as being. Thank you. I look at my company as being an extension of my home, so that Brian Hidiati, who's here, who worked for me, he'll tell you that the concept of work is really to provide a living for your family. That's the only reason why you go to work. You're not going to work because you want to become the CEO of a company. You're there to provide a living for your family. And so it's an extension of your home. And so when I started Micrel, I said, we want to make it an extension of our home. And maybe it's down the road, but it's just a long hallway from my living room to my workplace. So I don't let my workplace become my home. I let my home become my workplace. And so you have to balance that. And I did. I didn't work Saturdays and Sundays. I did work more than 8 hours a day, certainly. But I did not work 80 hours a week. Now, that doesn't mean that when I'm at home I'm not thinking about work, because I do. But I try not to. I try to separate work so that just like I don't sit at the dinner table and eat food 24/7, I don't sit there and work 24/7. Because, you just like if you ate too much, you're going to have a problem. And if you work too much, you're going to have a problem. So, I do the tough things first. So what I did is, every morning when I get up, I think of all the things I don't want to do, and I do them first, and I get them out of the way. That way they're not on my mind. I'm not thinking about the things that I have to do, that I didn't want to do the rest of the day. It's called procrastination, and procrastination is the bane of mankind. And so, don't procrastinate. Get those bad things you don't want to do off first. And I call the bad things, which are important, are the administrative tasks. So all of my administrative tasks, I got those done first, got them out of the way. Okay? Then I can be creative. Then I can be innovative. I have over 20 patents that I've done over my lifetime, and one of them being the wafer stepper.
You talk about being an employee-centric
Mm-hmm.
person with your company. And I'm just wondering, so what kind of programs did you have in place? What, how exactly did that work? Did you say that? And then I'm also wondering can you quantify the benefits? I mean, is there any way that you can say it was definitely worth my while, or, it's worth investing in the employees?
Okay, so Micrel had the lowest turnover in our industry. Our turnover was half the average of the industry. That's how you measure it. What is your turnover? And I watched that. I looked at department by department, and if I see a department that's having a high turnover, there's a problem there. Most people leave the company because they didn't like the supervisor. So I go in and I find out why do we have this high turnover in this particular group. Then I go fix that. So that's being employee-centric. Secondly, my door was never closed. My door was always open. Anybody could come in and talk to me. You didn't have to go through a secretary or some other administrative person. You did not have to do that. If you were considerate of my time, you didn't come in and waste my time, but my door was always open. I invited anyone at any level to come and see me and express their concerns. Right, Brian? He's nodding his head. So this is what we do to make it employee-centric, is we tell them they're important. We praise them. I ask them when I answer the phone, I say, how can I help you? That's how I answer my phone. I answer my own phone. I don't have somebody else answer my phone. We have a culture at Micrel where we said, whenever somebody approaches you, you ask them first, how can I help you? That sounds employee-centric, doesn't it? And then we had a culture of honesty and integrity, dignity of every individual. No swearing was allowed. We didn't allow any swearing at the company. If you did, you could lose your job. Lastly, we did whatever it takes, no excuses. In other words, we didn't take the concept of, well, okay, sorry you made a mistake, delay the project. If we didn't allow the project to expand, we said, okay, you made a mistake, you still got to stay within this time frame and get it done.
I mean, I see the value to the people,
okay,
right? That's obvious, but is there a way to value what you've done, for the people to the company?
Well, then you see, okay, you can look at your profitability. You can look at your at the kind of products you come out with, how creative, how good they are. Those you can quantify that. You can look at your at your cost to replace an employee, because if you have high turnover, that's a cost to the company, just to have to retrain that person. So you're going to lose about 3 months or at least a month and a half of an employee's value every time you have to replace that person. So that's a definite cost to the company. First question?
The first question is, how do you balance the employee-centric approach and customer is the king? Customer is king is always right.
Well, I think if you are employee-centric, you do think of your customer as king. You're not going to have employees who are going to work for you very long if you treat them as dogs and your customers as kings, because they'll see that all they are peasants. So my employees, honestly, are more important to me than my customers. And I'd rather lose a customer than lose an employee if I've hired the right people, because that's like getting rid of a family member. So you say, well, is your neighbor your king? Your family's your peasant? You protect your family. So your employees are your family. And you want to protect them, even against the supposed customer is king. And I'm not denying the fact that your customers aren't very, very important, but they're not more important than your employees. If your employees see that the customer is more important than they are, then they don't feel that it's an employee-centric company.
Yeah, what is the secret for the successful collaboration between the small business and the advisory board?
So an advisory board is not a board of directors, so you have to understand that. All an advisory board is, and they're just like a consultant. And if you use your advisory board properly as a consultant, that means you have to listen to them. If the advisory board is just there for, quote, window dressing, as you would, they're going to get the sense of that, and they're not going to help you. So what's in it for those advisors? That's the question you have to ask yourself: is how am I compensating those advisors? If you're listening to them, that's more important actually than the money they're going to get. So don't get an advisory board that's not going to be useful to you, because that's just going to be a waste of time for you and for them. And they'll find that out quickly if you don't listen to them. Thank you.